Good afternoon and welcome to this year's virtual presentation of ACEC Wisconsin. Today I'm going to be talking about code sets, the power of code sets. A little bit about myself before we get going here. My name is Josh Clawson. I'm the Design Technology Manager for the Civil Infrastructure Division of MGAC Technology Partners. I've been with MGAC for a little over 4 years now. I've got about 16 years experience working professionally with Autodesk products, starting from AutoCAD LT into full-blown AutoCAD, into Civil 3D, InfraWorks, Recap Photo, as well as some in Navisworks. And if any of you have seen me present before, you know that I'm very much an avid outdoorsman. This is a steelhead I got this past spring on the tributaries of Lake Michigan. So anyways, today we're going to be talking about code sets, so the power of code sets. But first we need to know, what are codes? So when we think of codes or code sets, what we're really talking about is how they're all of the pieces of subassemblies. So if you're familiar with what subassemblies are, you know that we've got various codes and subassemblies. The example I have on the screen here is just for the urban sidewalk. We've got point codes, we've got link codes, we've got shape codes. So if we look at the diagram on the right, the P's, P1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, those are all point codes. And the chart below will show you what the actual code is for those. So P2 would be sidewalk in, P3 would be sidewalk out. So those are individual, the intersection of two different links. So now links, if we look at the lower portion or the lower diagram, L1, L2, L3, L4, L5, L6, if we look down at the coding chart, we've got three different codes: top, sod, and datum. Now, I'm not going to say every subassembly, but most subassemblies will have a top code going across the top of the subassembly, so all of the links that make up the top of the subassembly, as well as a datum code, which is similar, but it follows along the bottom of that subassembly. These are good to know for creating surfaces for cut and fill volumes and cross sections. Now the shape code is that S1 that you see, and we've only got one shape code on this particular subassembly, but there are many different configurations of these, and what we refer to these as when we have a configuration of codes is what is called a code set. So what are code sets? And I feel these are one of the more complex items inside of the software. You can do a lot with code sets, and if anyone has ever been inside the code set dialogue or code set style dialogue, it can be a little daunting at first, especially if you're opening the out-of-the-box ones and you're wondering why codes aren't in there or how things are stylized or what exactly is going on inside that dialogue. And that's what we're going to cover today. So code sets are a configuration of link, point, shape, and feature line styles. Now, where are these used? We use these in the visual appearance or to control the visual appearance, as well as labeling, any hatching, what lines are shown, what lines are not shown. In assemblies, we can use them for corridors. And then the one that gets really creative, well, realistically, you can get pretty creative with all of these, but the one that I think is most valuable is the code sets for section views, or your corridor object in section view. It doesn't have anything to do with your section view itself. It's that actual corridor, the cross section of the corridor object, not the surfaces, not the section view, the actual corridor object. It's the visual appearance of that particular object, and we can utilize code sets to stylize, to hatch, to show what lines we want to see, what we don't want to see, and also to label. Now, there is another interesting way that you can use code sets for your corridors in plan view, to where you can actually print your corridor. So you determine which feature lines inside that corridor object you actually want to have remain visible, so you can then use that in plan production, as opposed to updating edge lines drawing that's consisting of polylines that you have to manually update if there are design changes down the road. So that's really all I've got for my PowerPoint, but what I'm going to do now is hop into Civil 3D, and we're going to walk through the differences and the different uses for code sets, some different tips and tricks in getting codes that are not currently in your code set into your code set, as well as how to configure a few of these different items that I've talked about. So here we are in Civil 3D. I'm actually in 2021. This is a drawing where I've just got some objects in here. I've got a corridor object, I've got some assemblies, I've also got some cross sections, and the annotation scale's a little weird on these, but we'll get to the cross sections later. First, we're going to look at assemblies. But prior to looking at the assemblies, let me just give a little bit of background. So where are your code sets located, and also shape styles, point styles, link styles, feature line styles. So on the settings tab of tool space, we can expand general, expand multi-purpose styles, and then here is where we're going to see our various styles. So we've got marker styles, which are the actual point styles. So if I expand this, here's all my marker styles. These are what are going to be used to display a point code, the visual appearance of that point code. And we'll dive in deeper on each of these different styles as well. We have feature line styles. Now, there's not a feature line code, but in a corridor, so if I zoom in on this, what you see that is perpendicular, or not perpendicular, parallel to the alignment. So our edge of traveled way, our face of curb, back of curb, flow line, sidewalk in, sidewalk out, even our daylight slope intercept lines, these are all feature lines that pass through points in our points. We'll get into this in a little bit more detail, but just know that the feature lines are a part of the code sets. And then our code set styles, here I've got some that are pre-configured, and we'll go through these, and then at the end we'll actually put one together and build, as well as go through some different options inside of these code sets. And then below that we have our link styles as well as our shape styles. Now these are just the visual appearance of these items. There are also a series of label styles that we can incorporate with this. So again, under general and then under label styles, notice I've got a shape, a link. So if I expand our marker label style, you can see I've got various label styles in here. Same thing for links as well as shapes. Now these are going to come into play in our code sets as well. So let's look at one of these code sets. So if I expand, we'll say the assembly code set, say that I want to edit it, got it on my other screen, hold this over. Information about these, or any style out there is going to have the information tab, but then realistically all there is the code tab. And we've got link, point, and shape. So as I expand link, and the assembly one, I've got all of the links looking the same for a section link. But notice all of the various codes that are in here. So I've got base, bench, curb, datum, daylight, daylight cut, daylight fill, ditch, pavement. These are referencing what subassemblies I have had selected, or what object that is based off of subassemblies that I imported. So this is very important to be able to import codes. If you're creating your own code set, the codes are not pre-populated. You have to select the object on screen, like a subassembly or a full assembly, a corridor object, either in plan view or in section view, and actually import those codes into your code set to be able to stylize those. If you look at the point codes, we've got some different marker styles in here, as well as our shape code, which these are all set to no display. Let's look at a different one. So if we look at, let's say, corridor plotting, if I look at my links, so I have the links on no display, but one thing to note here is that we have this materia area fill style. This will allow us to put a shape style into a link code. So what this does is it fills in the area that those links are landing on in plan view. It could be in any view, but you're only going to see this in plan view looking down, top down at those links. Point codes, everything's turned off. Shape codes, I've got pavement on here. Shape codes as well. Again, no display. This particular code set is for looking at our corridor in plan view and being able to print it. I've also got a code set that's corridor design, and that's what you see on screen here. As I zoom out, you can see we've got, different colorization for different objects to where our pavement links, our curb and gutter feature lines, our sidewalk feature lines, sidewalk links, as well as cut, fill, transitions. They're all colorized, giving you some useful information just by the color of that object on screen as to what it is. And this can be customized in any way, shape, or form. But if we transition this from corridor design, so if I go into my corridor properties, bring that over on this screen, and on the codes tab, this allows you to view these codes. You can't actually edit them in this dialog, but it'll allow you to see what code set is in place. I'm going to change this from corridor design to corridor plotting, and then go ahead and hit OK, and we'll see what that end result is. So it gives you something, and these particular colors, I've got a CTB file, so it prints these with a high level of screening, so they're just a light gray on screen. But this is one way that you can configure that so you do not print any of the links in your corridor. To illustrate what links are, let's go look at some assemblies. So I've got just a few assemblies in here, or in this particular drawing. They're nothing too crazy complex, but when you're working with assemblies, this particular code set is just showing the points. So these are the little circles. These are going to be where your points are at. And then I've got links, which are the lines that make up the subassemblies. I've got them all stylized to be just a white solid line. So some interesting things that we can do with this is, let's go and adjust that assembly code set. So if I come into my links, and I've got all of these set as section links, but let's say I want the pavement to be a different style. I've got a few in here, so I'll say pave links, and I want my sidewalk to be a concrete. Well, I'll use curb. It's the same as concrete. And then my curb, I will adjust this as well, just to show what this will do. So now I've got a blue line here. One thing to note, I'm not sure why that didn't work. And what's happening here is we've got, so remember when I said that most subassemblies out there are going to have a top and a datum code. So why is this sidewalk just showing this greenish colored line on top? Well, it's because that datum code is running across the bottom. So I'm going to change that datum code to a no display, and we should see some different colorization here. So we'll expand links, come down and find datum. It is set to a section link. I'm going to change that to a no display, as well as my top code. I'm going to change that to a no display. And then hit OK. And we will see those colors populate better now. So across the top of the curb, the pavement. So what other useful information could be pertinent in this situation? If we were to put labels on this code, or on this assembly, or the code set for assemblies, showing maybe what point codes are being used, or what point codes are in this assembly, what link codes. If we were trying to troubleshoot this, it might be helpful to label what links are actually in there, especially if we're trying to build out a code set, things that we want to see differently on screen. So let's look at this assembly code set again. And we'll look at just links for now. So I've gone through and I've changed some styles in my links to visually see something different. So let's go through these. And I've got some pre-built link styles. Subbase, let's see. I don't have a base one in there. Top will be no display. Slope link, this would be like one of our daylights. I'll just say daylight transition. I've got daylight fill. I've got a daylight fill in there. Daylight cut. Daylight, I'm going to actually set to a no display. I'm going to make a base link here real quick. So to be able to access this, you can either come in through the drop down in the pick a link style dialog that pops up, create new, copy current, or edit. I'm going to go a different route, so I'm going to hit cancel here. I'm going to say OK, and we'll just see kind of what happens. So now we've got some different colored lines in here, our cut and fill for our daylighting. But under multi-purpose, under link styles, I'm just going to right click and say new. So in my link style, I'm just going to call this base. Under the display tab, this is really what I get. I've got model, I've got section, and then I've got plan view. Now, assemblies are one of those goofy items to where plan view, that we're looking in plan view right here. Section view would be after we get it into the actual section view, so like the corridor object in section view. But realistically, all I need to do is turn this on, and I'm just going to give it a unique color, and we'll just use kind of a gray. And we'll just call this base. Go ahead and hit OK. Then I'm going to jump back into my assembly code set, expand links, and find my sub base. I'll change that to base, and then base, so I'll change that to base as well. Hit OK, hit OK, and we see those items turn a slight color of gray. That's a little like white on a black screen. So under my link styles, I'm going to find base, and I'm going to adjust that color. We'll just make it, I guess, 153. That'll work. And we'll see those update and change. Some other things we can do with our code set is, I'm going to jump back in. So we've got links. Notice we've got this whole label column here. If I want to see what the slope of my pavement is, I can put a label, and these are pre-configured. So I'm going to say grade 02, so that's just 02 text height, then it's a % grade. And then go ahead and hit OK, and we'll see that negative 2% cross slope populate. If I come into my subassembly, come into the subassembly properties and go into my parameters and change my default slope to say negative 4%, hit OK, that label updates. It's reading the slope of that particular link. So this can be useful in many different places. Now, if we wanted our daylights as well to, say what our defaults are, we could put those labels in there as well. I'm not going to go super deep into labeling all of these different links, but we have the ability to do that. Now, another useful item is labeling the point codes. So if I come into my assembly code set and expand points, notice I've got, nothing too crazy going on with my points. I've just got a handful of these marker point and then a dot styles, and then a couple of these are marker point circle, marker point cut, marker point fill. These are just stylized to reflect the same colors or the size of the circle. But let's say our edge of traveled way, we want to put a label on this. and I want to say, so I've got some of these in here: elevation only, elevation and offset, and right away offset. If I say elevation only, these are configured for a cross-section view or a section view of a corridor. So I'm going to create a new one, create new, and I'm going to just call this point code. And we can just leave this stuff as is. And our text height, we'll do it really small, so 0.01. And my contents, I'm going to come into my text component editor, and I'm just going to select point code and push that over. And we can see like EOP, edge of pavement. This is our preview, but I'm going to rotate this 45 degrees, and then I'm going to give it a Y offset of, I guess, 0.01 maybe. We'll see what that looks like. And an X offset of 0.01 as well. Now let's go a little farther. 0.03 and 0.03. And then I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. Hit OK. Hit OK. And we can see our ETW code right there. Now, if I wanted to put, that label on every code, it's going to get cluttered, but it allows you to view what's going on. So if I say edit, go into expand points, I'm going to grab basically everything and change, so I label everything. So every single point that is in this current code set is going to have the point code label on it. And as I said, they get a little cluttered, but it allows you to go in and differentiate which code we're talking about. So we've got back of gutter, top of gutter, flow line of gutter, and then this one gets confusing because we've got edge of traveled way for our pavement, and our pavement 1, our pavement 2, our base, and our sub base. And you can see all of those stacked on top of each other: sidewalk in, sidewalk out, and then all of the various daylight codes as well. Daylight cut, daylight fill. But this is a way to throw a label on to quickly determine which codes you're dealing with. Now when we get into corridor objects, you are going to want to know which of these point codes you want feature lines passing through. So let me illustrate this real quick, what I'm talking about with the feature lines. I'm going to change the code set on my corridor back to corridor design. Again, going into the corridor properties on the codes tab, I'm going to select corridor design. Hit OK, rebuild my corridor, and we'll see that update showing all of the links and feature lines in my corridor build. I'm going to jump into Object Viewer real quick. And we'll see this corridor, if I look at it in somewhat of an isometric view, when I'm talking about the feature lines. So the feature lines pass through light codes. Now this particular code set is just showing the top links, that not the top links, but the coded links that indicate the top of an object. So we kind of see that top shell of the corridor, if you will. The lines that are running longitudinally down the corridor, these are feature lines that are passing through common or like point codes. So if we have our assembly, and again, this is just the top of the assembly except for the sidewalk. So if I've got a back of curb code, I've got a feature line that passes through all of the back of curb codes, giving me that longitudinal line that represents my corridor. Same thing with flow lines, same thing with sidewalk in, sidewalk out, as well as my daylighting. These are all indicated by feature lines visually. And to know which point codes are passing through, these can be beneficial to label these. So what about links? We can also label the link codes because this comes into play, again, in your code set, just trying to dissect that code set. I'm going to jump back into the assembly code set, and I'm going to expand links, and we put the grade on one of them, but what about the actual code itself? I don't have one in here, so I'm going to make a link label style real quick. I'm just going to say create new, and I'll just call it link code. And 0.01 should be fine. And I'm just going to pick my link codes, push that over. So we'll see top. That would be a link code, but it's just a preview of what we're going to get. Say OK there, and then I'm going to apply this to all of the link codes. Again, it could get a little messy having all of the link codes on, but at least you get an idea of everything that is populated in there. So if I want to go and turn like top off, just to make this a little easier to read, I find my top and my datum link codes. So here's top. I'm going to turn this so there's no label on it. And my datum, same thing. Go ahead and hit OK. Now we get a little bit better indication of what all of these links are and what the names of those links are. So we can configure this assembly code set, or the code set that you're going to use for viewing assemblies, in a fashion that gives information that is pertinent to your design that you need at the assembly phase. Also, we could configure a code set that would allow you to print your assemblies as a typical section, reducing the amount of rework that you would have to do. We could put labels in for different slopes in different areas, thicknesses of items, even the length of the link itself. So I believe I've got a 12-foot lane here. I'm going to jump into my code set again under links, and I'm going to find pave 1. Actually, all of my pavement ones I'm going to turn no label on, and then just my pavement, I believe, is the one I want. I've got a label set up that's length, so it should tell us the length of that link. And we'll see that 12. And you could go into the label style and configure this so it says 12 feet or whatever. But we can pull slopes, we can pull, I mean, there's a variety of configurations. You could have 12-foot lane at -2% slope, and then through the X and Y offsets, position that label where you want it, so you would be able to print your typical section. All right, moving on to the corridor object itself. So if we look at our corridor design code set, I'm going to expand this so we can see what's going on. This is really just link codes and point codes. Now the point codes are on a no display because the point codes can only be seen in what we'll call a section view, taking a cross section of that corridor. If you look at it from top down, you're just going to get a little line extension where the circle marker is for your link. But if you notice under the feature line column, there's a bunch of stylized feature lines going through these codes. So the feature lines pass through the link code. This is important if you want to configure the look and feel of your corridor in plan view. These are not relevant in section view when you're looking at that same corridor object. So we've got a feature line style passing through the back of curb point code, giving us the back of curb line that we visually see. As far as shapes, there are no, you wouldn't be able to see the shapes. These are, again, going to be very similar to the points, to where we're only going to see those in a sliced section view of that corridor object, or at every assembly insertion point if you go into Model Viewer. So just out of curiosity, what happens if I'm going to create a new code set out of this, just to illustrate this. Oops. Copy it. And on my links, I'm going to turn everything on to, we'll just call it section links, so they're all white. My points, I'm going to turn all of the points on, so it's basically turning all of my codes on. I'm not going to do shape styles, but I'm going to jump back into that corridor. So we'll say that we want a circle on all of these. So we'll say that we want a circle on all of these. And then again, my shapes, we'll leave these all as no display, and I'll make a change to illustrate that. afterwards. So I've got my corridor design copy. I'm going to select my corridor, go into my corridor properties, go into the codes tab, and grab my corridor design copy. Hit OK. Rebuilds my corridor. My feature lines are still all stylized as they were. But if I go into Object Viewer now, we should see all of those links. So we get a full, what looks like our subassembly at every insertion point. And I did use the larger circle marker for the points. Hopefully that's making sense, how this corridor is built and how the codes actually influence the visual appearance of that corridor. Now to look at this corridor plotting, how we would configure that. If I come into my corridor plotting, my links, I have turned all of the links to a no display. My points are all at a no display, but I do have just some of the feature lines that I want to see. Topic curb, sidewalk out, sidewalk in, flow line, back a curb, and that's really it. And you could configure this differently. If I wanted to see my slope intercept line, I would be able to turn my daylight cut, daylight fill, and have a feature line passing through those point codes. My shapes, I do not have shapes turned on, but the one thing that I do have, and I touched on this earlier, is my link codes. Even though I have the links on no display, I can still assign a shape style if you want. So let's change this to my corridor plotting code set style. I'm going to select my corridor, go into corridor properties, and toggle this back to corridor plotting. Hit OK, and we should see that update. Now, if you don't want that materia area fill style in place, let's go ahead and look at that. I'm going to change that. So under my links, I'm going to take my material area fill, that's a kind of a tongue twister, and I'm going to turn all of these to none. So I have no materia area fill. What I will be left with are just the designated feature lines that I want to display in my corridor. So you get something like this. Now I could turn my offset alignments to a no display style. Just going to access this in the properties, no display, and we get something along these lines. So if I make adjustments to my alignment, and this is probably going to screw up my sample lines, but I'll just undo and then rebuild my corridor, because this is my actual corridor object. We can see that that reorients appropriately. So I'm just going to undo that real quick, and we should be back to where we were. So some cool things you can do with your corridor. If you just want the sidewalk hatched, let's see what that looks like. I'll go a different direction here. I'm going to go into my corridor properties. I'm going to go to my codes tab and my corridor plotting. I'm just going to edit it while I'm in here. Under my links, I find my sidewalk, and I want a materia area fill. I can come in and select a shape style. Then I'll just use concrete. Go ahead and hit OK, hit OK, hit OK. And now our sidewalks have that colorization to them. Before I get into section views, I do want to touch on these different link styles. We looked at a link style. We created a new link style for subbase. But let's look at each of these individual styles that make up a code set, or that are associated with codes. Link styles, again, if we look at base, and we do have the ability to change what this looks like in plan view, model view, and section view. Like many different Civil 3D objects, we have the different view directions. But realistically, the link, it's just the line. The line that's associated with that code, we're giving it a color, we're giving it a line type or a line type scale. We could have this pulling from a layer out of Layer Property Manager. In this instance, I just have it to layer 0, so it defaults to the object layer. I'm going to hit cancel there. Let's see. So marker styles. Marker styles are used in many different places inside of Civil 3D. We've got them for, like, for instance, the marker style for a geometry point, this small little circle, that's a marker style. The markers that represent the points in our code set style, those are marker styles. So we have various marker styles. If we look at a marker style, I'm just going to come into this marker point circle and go to the marker tab. We can use an AutoCAD point for the marker. We can use a custom marker. So if I wanted to have a plus sign in the middle of a circle, and then we're telling it how large we want it to be based on our drawing scale, which can really, there's a few different ways to configure this. I'm not going to dive into all of these, but the one I currently have is use drawing scale. We also have the option to use an AutoCAD block for a symbol marker. So you could have a block that you want to utilize in here. But I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. And we should see now we've got little plus signs on all of the markers that are associated with that style, or all of the point codes that are associated with that marker style. Feature line styles. Again, feature lines are used in many different places. We use them for grading. We use them to produce the longitudinal lines in our corridor and other items, baselines, and corridors themselves. Feature line styles, if we just look at crown of road, come in and edit this. Now the feature lines, because they have more functionality, are a little bit different of an animal. They're not quite as simple, but we have these vertex markers that we can configure in profile view and section view. But then when we get to display, again, it's just a, we only have one component: plan view, model view, profile, and section. Again, we're configuring if we want it to land on a layer, what color, what line type, so on and so forth. And the last one is a shape style that I'm going to touch on. So under shape styles, if we just look at asphalt, this is one that I've created. Say edit, bring it up. I've got a display tab, and we have the shape border line and the shape area fill. So we can have a border as well as an area fill. This area fill is controlled by a hatch pattern. So I'm going to change this, instead of solid fill, I'm going to say predefined, and we'll use just an ANSI 130 or an ANSI 31. Hit OK. I'm going to leave these scales. This might get a little goofy with the scale to 1, but I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. And on my corridor plotting code set, I'm going to go back in and add the materia area fill for pavement to be asphalt, and we should see that hatch pattern populate. Those other shape styles that I have in this drawing, I've just got them as solids, but now we can see, that got really tight. Now we can see we've got this hatch pattern in here. To control that, I'm going to come into my asphalt shape style. I'm going to change the scale, we'll say 5, to bump that up a bit. Hit OK. And we should see that update. Now that update didn't happen initially. I do want to go into just kind of reset my corridor. And that's one thing that code sets, as you're working on them, can get a little sticky, to where you need to switch the code set back and forth to see the change fully update sometimes. I'm just going to come back in here and change it back to corridor plotting, and we should see that updated, larger scale cross-hatching. Cool. Now let's talk about cross-sections. I'm going to change my annotation scale to a 1 to 20 so my section views look right. And just real quick, I'm going to update my section view layout. So these are sections of that particular corridor that we were just looking at. If I zoom in, notice that all of these labels, this is one object when I select it. This is the corridor object with a code set applied to it. We kind of inspect what is going on here. I've got offset labels for various items at particular codes. I've got a slope label for my lane. I've got a centerline crown, elevation. And if we look at the shapes, I've got concrete hatch for the curb and gutter. I've got a solid that, per the CPB file, will print with a screening on it, so it'll be a light gray. And then I've got a sand hatch for the base and sub base. Now we can get creative with this stuff as well. If I wanted to call out the slope of the sidewalk, I could put a sidewalk code on here. If I wanted to call out the slope of the terrace, I could put a slope code here as well. But to understand what's going on here, I'm actually going to go into my section view properties and look at my sections. So I've got a surface, which is my existing ground surface, so my data source, and then I've got a corridor section. This is not the corridor surface itself. And actually, let's go into the section view group properties. That might be a better indication of what's going on. So here we go, existing ground and corridor. If we look at a corridor surface, will be indicated by a slightly different symbol. But under the style, when it's asking what style we want to use, it's actually a code set is the style. So when you're creating sample lines and cutting cross sections, the style for that corridor object, it's referring to one of your code set styles. If I change this to corridor design and hit OK and hit OK, we're going to see very similar to what we saw inside of Object Viewer when I first went in there looking at the corridor. We're just seeing the top links. Now the reason sidewalk is showing all four sides of that sidewalk is because that is the same code all the way around the perimeter of that object. But just something to look at to see what these different codes look like. I'm going to jump back in and change all of my codes back to our assembly code set. So corridor design, we're going to change that back to not assembly but section view. Hit OK, and we'll see that information update. So now I'm going to actually look at a couple other things we can do with shape codes. And I'm going to modify this one. First, we're going to come in and kind of inspect it, and then I will actually modify some of the shape codes. Things we can do are put the area. We can do the shape code area if we want to get the area of the sub base. If we want to get the area of the sidewalk, there's different reasons why we would want to do that. So let's go in and make an area label for a shape code. And I'm going to just look at the sub base of this particular lane. If I go into the code set, so edit code set style, and I look at my shapes, we can see how these shapes are configured. I've got these various codes that are shape codes that are indicating a space in between links that can be filled in with a shape style. And we looked at these shape styles already, but my label style, so let's look at my sub base, and I'm going to add a label on that, but we'll make a new one. I'm going to say create new, and we'll just call this area. And on the layout tab, I'm going to put it as 0.01 inches. And under my contents, I'm going to take that off and say shape area. I can push that over, and I got it to, 2 decimal place square feet. Well, let's go ahead and apply that and hit OK, and we should see the resulting square footage of a particular cross section in those areas. All right. At this time, I think we're going to open it up for questions. So, well, before that, just as a review, we've gone through what code sets are, how to configure different code sets, and the last thing I do need to show you is if we bring in, so let me grab a different sub-assembly from my tool palette and drop in, let's find something like shoulders. I know I don't have any shoulders in here. I'm just going to drop this in to show how to get these different codes in this particular item. So like EPS code, I know I don't have. What else? We've got sub base, base 1, 2, 3, and 4. I know I don't have those. So if we look at the code set that is being applied to this assembly, assembly properties, and come into the codes tab, my assembly's code set if I expand this for my points, I did not have that base 1, 2, 3, 4 or sub base 1, 2, 3. I've just got, where am I at? I've just got base and sub base. So any code set you're in, and the reason those are stylized is because I've got my default codes or no codes set as this marker point. So if I say my default to no display and this one to no display and hit OK, we should see all of those circles disappear that are not coded, because uncoded means that it's not defined in that code set. So if I want to define that in that code set, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to that assembly code set, and just to show that I'm in the same one, I do not have any of those sub-base codes going up to 4. If I select import codes at the bottom, this allows me to go out and select an assembly, a sub-assembly, a corridor, or a section view, the corridor object in section view. So I'm going to select the assembly, hit enter, and now here are all of my EPS base 1, 2, 3, EPS pave, sub-base. I just brought all of those codes in. So this is a way to make your own customized code sets for items that may not look appropriate with the out-of-the-box code sets or the code sets coming from any other template you're using. If you're using something goofy and you need to get those codes in, you can come in and do that. I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. And that wraps up where I'm at. So just as a review, code sets are a configuration of codes. We have point codes, we have link codes, we have shape codes. In the instance of a corridor and plan view, we have point codes that need a corresponding feature line passing through them to give us our longitudinal lines. Links are always going to be perpendicular to your alignment. Your feature lines are going to, for the most part, be parallel unless you're targeting something. Our shape codes can be used either in section view or in assembly view. We can populate labels to links to shapes as well as point codes and configure those labels to meet our demands or needs at the current time. I definitely recommend creating a code set for assemblies that gives you design information that you're not actually going to print, and potentially creating a code set that has printable information to use as a typical section, so you don't have to double up on your typical section details. For your cross sections, you can get creative. What information do you need to show on your section views as it pertains to your corridor cross section, and be able to label any of that through the use of code sets, as well as stylize to your firm's preference what you want your cross section of your corridor to look like. And lastly, with the corridor, I definitely encourage any of you to explore this option of a code set for printing or plotting your corridor, as this eliminates rework and having to update edgeline drawings. But that's all I've got for you guys today. Let's go ahead and turn this back over to my slideshow, and I need to get back to this one. So thank you. This is my email address. You guys can reach out to me with any questions or inquiries on anything we discussed today or anything else pertaining to Civil 3D or civil engineering design software. Now I believe, Andrew, we're going to open it up for questions.